The Georgia's sun beat down mercilessly on Whitmore Plantation in the summer of 1842, turning the cotton fields into a shimmering white ocean that stretched to the horizon. Isaiah wiped sweat from his brow as he supervised the loading of the season's first harvest, his powerful frame moving with practiced efficiency among the wagons. At 32 years old, he had survived what many could not. 15 years of bondage had carved his body into iron, and his mind into something sharper still. Henry Whitmore stood on his columned veranda, watching through a brass telescope as Isaiah directed the other slaves with hand signals and low commands. The master was a tall man with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who had never questioned his place in the world's order. Beside him, his overseer, Jonas Pritchard, spat tobacco juice into a porcelain spittoon. "That boy's got a gift for organizing the others," Pritchard said, his weathered face creased with suspicion. "Sometimes I wonder if he ain't too smart for his own good." Whitmore lowered the telescope, his expression thoughtful. "Intelligence in a slave is only dangerous when it's paired with disobedience. Isaiah has been nothing but loyal since I purchased him at auction. His previous master was a fool to let him go." What Whitmore didn't know, what he could never know, was that Isaiah had taught himself to read by studying his discarded newspapers in the dead of night, that he understood the growing tensions between North and South, and that behind his carefully maintained mask of servitude burned a quiet, desperate rage that he fed with silence. That evening, news arrived that would change everything. A rider from the neighboring Callaway estate brought word of an uprising. 12 slaves had attempted to murder the overseer and flee north. The rebellion had been crushed with terrible violence, but the fear it sparked spread like wildfire through every plantation in the county. By morning, 3 slaves had been hanged in the Callaway family cemetery as a warning, their bodies left to swing in the August heat. Whitmore called an emergency gathering of all his slaves in the central yard. Isaiah stood in the front row, his face carefully blank as the master paced before them, his riding crop tapping against his polished boots. "What happened at Callaway's could happen here," Whitmore announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "But it won't. Because you all understand that I'm a fair master. I feed you, I clothe you, I provide you with shelter and purpose. In return, I expect loyalty and obedience." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the assembled faces, men, women, and children standing in the brutal sun, their futures entirely in his hands. "Last night, Isaiah came to me with information. He'd overheard talk of similar plans being whispered among some of you." Whitmore's announcement sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. Several slaves turned to look at Isaiah, their expressions unreadable. "Because of his loyalty. Those plans will never come to fruition. Because of Isaiah, this plantation remains peaceful and prosperous." Isaiah felt his stomach twist. It was true. He had overheard desperate talk among the younger men, fevered dreams of freedom that would only lead to death. He had gone to Whitmore not out of loyalty, but out of desperate calculation. If the rebellion happened, everyone would suffer. The innocent would hang alongside the guilty. He had chosen the lesser evil, but the weight of that choice sat on his shoulders like chains. "Therefore," Whitmore continued, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality, "Isaiah will be rewarded. From this day forward, he will serve not in the fields, but in my house. He will be given better quarters, better food, and responsibilities befitting his loyalty." The announcement stunned everyone, including Isaiah. House slaves occupied a strange middle ground, neither truly free nor as brutally oppressed as field workers. It was a position that bred resentment on all sides. But Whitmore wasn't finished. "Furthermore, he will serve as personal attendant to my daughter, Miss Margaret. He will ensure her safety, manage her household needs, and prove that loyalty is rewarded on this plantation." The silence that followed was absolute. Isaiah's blood ran cold. Every slave understood what this meant. A black man in close proximity to a white woman was a death sentence waiting to happen. One false accusation, one misunderstood gesture, and he would be hanging from a tree by sunrise. Margaret Whitmore learned of her father's decision when she returned from her afternoon ride. She swept into the house in a rustle of green taffeta, her blonde hair pinned beneath a riding hat, and found her father waiting in the parlor with a satisfied expression. "Father, what's this I hear about changes to the household staff?" She kept her voice level, though her fingers trembled as she removed her gloves. "Just a matter of security, my dear," Whitmore replied, pouring himself a brandy. "With the unrest at 𝘾𝙗𝙖𝙞𝙣, I want someone trustworthy watching over you. Isaiah has proven himself. He'll be your shadow, always present, always vigilant." "I don't need a shadow," Margaret said quietly. "I have Mary to attend me." "Mary is getting old. Isaiah is strong, intelligent, and absolutely loyal. The matter is settled." Margaret turned away, her jaw tight. At 22, she had learned that arguing with her father was futile. Her life had been a series of gilded cages, each more restrictive than the last. She was educated, accomplished in music and French, and utterly powerless. Her engagement to Charles Beauregard, a neighboring plantation owner's son, had been arranged since she was 16. The wedding was planned for spring, and she would trade her father's house for her husband's with no say in the matter. But this, having a slave assigned to her constant company, felt like a new kind of imprisonment, one that could destroy both of them through mere proximity. Isaiah moved into the small room adjacent to the main house that evening. It was larger than his previous quarters, with a real bed and a window, but it might as well have been a prison cell. He understood the impossible position he'd been placed in. Every moment near Margaret would be scrutinized. One wrong word, one lingering glance, and accusations would fly. Their first encounter came the next morning. Isaiah stood in the hallway outside Margaret's room, waiting to escort her to breakfast. When she emerged, her eyes met his for only a moment before sliding away. She was dressed in a pale blue morning gown, her hair elaborately styled, and she carried herself with the rigid composure of someone who had been trained since birth to maintain appearances. "You don't need to follow so closely," she said as they descended the stairs. "Stay at a distance." "Yes, Miss Margaret." Isaiah's voice was carefully neutral. The pattern established itself over the following days. Isaiah remained present but invisible, a shadow that Margaret tried to ignore. He accompanied her on walks through the garden, stood outside the music room while she practiced piano, and waited in corridors while she took her meals. They exchanged no more than necessary words, always formal, always proper, always aware that ears were listening. But on the fifth night, Isaiah heard something that changed everything. He was standing outside Margaret's door, as was now his duty, when he heard the sound of muffled sobbing. It was quiet, carefully controlled, the sound of someone who had learned to cry in silence. He stood frozen, his hand hovering near the door handle, knowing he should walk away but unable to move. The crying continued for nearly an hour. When it finally stopped, Isaiah retreated to his room, but sleep would not come. He lay awake in the darkness, thinking about the girl on the other side of the wall, a girl who was also a prisoner, though her chains were made of silk and social expectation rather than iron. 3 weeks passed. The household settled into its new routine. Isaiah proved himself indispensable. He was stronger than the aging servants, more reliable, and possessed a quiet intelligence that made him good at anticipating needs. But the wall between him and Margaret remained absolute, until the night of the garden incident. Margaret had formed a habit of walking in the rose garden after dinner, when the evening air cooled and the fireflies began their nightly dance. Isaiah followed at his usual respectful distance, half hidden by the shadows of the magnolia trees. But that night, Margaret's fiancé Charles Beauregard arrived unexpectedly for a visit. Isaiah watched from the darkness as Charles found Margaret among the roses. The conversation started pleasantly enough, but Charles had been drinking. His voice grew louder, more insistent. "The wedding needs to happen sooner," Charles was saying, his hand gripping Margaret's arm. "I'm tired of waiting for you like some kind of prize to be won. You're mine. It's already been decided." "You're hurting me," Margaret said quietly, trying to pull away. "Don't be dramatic." Charles yanked her closer, and Isaiah saw Margaret's face contort with pain. He stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Miss Margaret, your father is asking for you." Charles spun around, his face flushing red. "What the hell are you doing here, boy?" "I accompany Miss Margaret on her evening walks. Master's orders." "Well, go back to wherever you belong. We're having a private conversation." Isaiah looked at Margaret. Her eyes were wide, pleading silently. He knew what he should do. Obey Charles, walk away, let whatever happened happen. But something in him snapped. Perhaps it was the memory of his own wife, sold away years ago while he stood helpless. Perhaps it was the weeks of watching Margaret's carefully maintained facade. Perhaps it was simply that he was tired of being invisible. "I can't do that, sir. I have my orders." Charles's face went from red to purple. He released Margaret and took a step toward Isaiah. "You forget your place, slave." "No, sir. I know exactly what my place is." Isaiah's voice remained level, but his hands were clenched at his sides. The confrontation might have escalated into violence if Whitmore hadn't appeared, drawn by the raised voices. He took in the scene with a glance. His daughter's tear-stained face, Charles's drunken aggression, Isaiah's defiant stance. "Charles, I think it's best you retire for the evening," Whitmore said smoothly. "We can discuss the wedding details in the morning, when heads are clearer." After Charles was led away by a servant, Whitmore turned his attention to Isaiah and Margaret. His eyes narrowed as he studied them both. "Margaret, go inside. Isaiah, remain here." When Margaret was gone, Whitmore stepped closer to Isaiah, so close that Isaiah could smell the tobacco on his breath. "What happened here?" "Mr. Beauregard was being rough with Miss Margaret, Master. I felt it my duty to intervene." "Your duty is to do as you're told, and nothing more." Whitmore's voice was soft, dangerous. "But I'll overlook it this once, because you were technically following my orders to protect her. However, let me be very clear. If you ever speak to a white man that way again, you'll be whipped until you can't stand. Understood?" "Yes, Master." "Good. Now, get back to your post." But something had shifted. Margaret waited for Isaiah the next morning with a different expression, not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. For the first time, she truly looked at him. "Thank you," she said quietly when they were alone, "for last night." "Just following orders, Miss Margaret." "No," she shook her head. "You didn't have to do that. You could have walked away." They stood in the hallway, a shaft of morning sunlight falling between them like a wall. Isaiah knew he should say nothing more, should rebuild the barrier that had protected them both, but he was tired, so tired of pretending. "I know what it's like to be trapped," he said simply. Margaret's eyes widened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then so quietly, he almost didn't hear. "So do I." That brief exchange opened a door that should have remained locked forever. Over the following weeks, they began to talk, carefully, quietly, always aware of the danger. Margaret would practice piano while Isaiah stood nearby, and she would speak as if to herself, knowing he was listening. She told him about her mother, dead from fever when Margaret was 12. About the suffocating expectations that governed every moment of her life. About her fear of the wedding, of Charles, of a future that stretched before her like a life sentence. Isaiah listened, and sometimes, when he was certain they were alone, he would respond. He told her about the plantation in Virginia where he was born, about learning to read by candlelight, about his wife and daughter who were sold when he was 25. He had never spoken of them to anyone. The words had been locked inside him for 7 years, festering like an infected wound. "What were their names?" Margaret asked one evening as twilight fell through the music room windows. "Sarah and Grace." Isaiah's voice cracked on the second name. Grace was 3 years old. I'm sorry. Margaret's hand stilled on the piano keys. I'm so sorry for what my world has done to yours. Your world? Isaiah turned to look at her fully, forgetting caution for a moment. You think you're not part of it? You live in this house built by slaves. You wear dresses sewn by slaves. I know. Margaret's voice broke. God help me. I know. And I hate it. I hate all of it. But what can I do? I'm as much property as you are. Just a different kind. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Isn't it? She stood, her composure finally cracking. I can't choose who I marry. I can't control my own money. If I protest too loudly, I can be locked away in an asylum. If Charles decides to beat me after we're married, the law says it's his right. Tell me how that's freedom. They stared at each other across the room, both trembling with anger and fear and something neither could name. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway, and they sprang apart like guilty children. A housemaid passed by, oblivious, and the moment was gone. But the walls between them had crumbled beyond repair. The summer deepened into oppressive heat. Margaret's engagement party approached, and the house filled with preparations. Isaiah watched from his position in the shadows as the Society for 𝘾𝙝𝙖 of the county paraded through Whitmore's halls, merchants and planters and their painted wives, all performing an elaborate dance of civilization built on brutality. Late one night, unable to sleep, Isaiah found himself in the library. He had discovered that Whitmore kept it unlocked, confident that his slaves were too ignorant to read. Isaiah had been stealing moments there for weeks, consuming books like a man dying of thirst. That night he was reading a speech about liberty when Margaret appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, a candle in her hand. They both froze. This was beyond dangerous, a slave and a white woman alone together in the dark. If anyone found them, explanations wouldn't matter. I couldn't sleep, Margaret whispered. Neither could I. She moved into the room, closing the door softly behind her. What are you reading? Isaiah hesitated, then showed her the book. Her eyes widened as she recognized the text. Revolutionary speeches, forbidden ideas about freedom and equality. If my father knew you could read, he'd sell me if I was lucky, kill me if I wasn't. Margaret sank into a chair, her candle casting dancing shadows across the walls. How did you learn? So he told her. About the old slave on the Virginia plantation who had been taught by a sympathetic owner, who had passed the knowledge to Isaiah before dying. About the risk he took every time he opened a book, the way knowledge felt like both power and torture because it showed him exactly how thoroughly he was trapped. I used to think it was a curse, Isaiah said quietly. Knowing how to read, understanding what's written in these books about freedom and rights, it would be easier to be ignorant. But you wouldn't give it up. No, never. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then, teach me. Isaiah looked at her in confusion. You already know how to read. Not to read. Teach me to see. You look at this house, this world, and you see the truth of it. I've been trained my whole life to look away, to pretend the ugliness doesn't exist. I don't want to pretend anymore. So began the most dangerous thing either of them had ever done. Night after night, they met in the library after the household slept. Isaiah showed her the hidden costs of her comfortable life, the scars on his back from a whipping he'd received for dropping a water bucket when he was 14, the way children were sold away from their mothers, the casual, everyday violence that kept the system running. Margaret showed him something too. The cage of respectability that bound her, the way women of her class were traded like livestock at market, expected to be ornamental and silent and always obedient. We're both property, she said one night, just owned in different ways. No, Isaiah shook his head. You'll never understand what it's like. You can't. You can walk away from this house and people will still see you as human. I can't ever escape what I am. You're right. Margaret's voice was thick with tears. "And I hate that you're right. I hate that I benefit from your suffering. I hate that I don't know how to fix it. I hate that I'm falling in." She stopped herself, pressing her hands to her mouth. The word hung unspoken between them like a death sentence. They didn't touch, they barely looked at each other. But something had shifted irrevocably. The thing that shouldn't happen, couldn't happen, was happening anyway, not because of proximity or circumstance, but because two people trapped in different cages had found in each other the only person who truly understood. The night before Margaret's engagement party, she came to the library in tears. Charles had arrived earlier that evening, drunk and proprietary, discussing with her father how he planned to tame her after the wedding. No one had thought to send her away before the conversation. She was, after all, just another piece of property being negotiated over. Isaiah found her curled in a chair, shaking with silent sobs. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain distance, but he couldn't bear it. He knelt beside her chair, keeping his hands carefully at his sides. "Margaret." She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I can't do it. I can't marry him. I can't spend the rest of my life as his property. I'll go mad. I'll die." "You'll survive. You're stronger than you know." "I don't want to survive." Her voice was fierce. "I want to live. Just once, I want to make one choice that's mine." Then she leaned forward and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Isaiah was too shocked to move. Then the world came crashing back. The danger, the impossibility, the certain death this would bring them both. He pulled away, standing so quickly he knocked over a stack of books. "We can't. Margaret, we can't. They'll kill us both." "I know." She was crying openly now. "I know it's impossible. I know it's wrong. I know all the reasons we can't, but tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm alone in this." Isaiah closed his eyes. Every law, every social rule, every survival instinct he had demanded he lie. But he had spent his whole life lying, and he was so tired. "You're not alone," he whispered. They stood in the darkness, 3 feet of space between them that might as well have been an ocean. They both knew that what they felt, this connection that had grown from shared captivity and whispered truths, could never be acted upon. To do so would be suicide. "After the wedding, you'll be reassigned," Margaret said dully. "Charles made that clear. He doesn't want you anywhere near me." "That's for the best." "Is it?" She laughed bitterly. "The best would be if we lived in a world where this wasn't impossible. The best would be if I could choose you instead of being sold to Charles like a broodmare. The best would be a lot of things we'll never have." The engagement party was a lavish affair that drew the elite from 3 counties. Isaiah worked as a server, moving through the crowd with trays of champagne, invisible despite being in plain sight. He watched Margaret in her white gown, her smile fixed and empty, dancing with Charles while the band played and the guests toasted the future bride and groom. Late in the evening, Margaret pleaded a headache and retired to her room. Isaiah, still assigned to her service, followed at a distance. When they reached her room, she paused at the door. "Isaiah." "Yes, Miss Margaret." "If things were different—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "I know." She went inside and closed the door. Isaiah took his position in the hallway, as he had done every night for 3 months. He would stay there until dawn, guarding a woman he could never have from dangers both real and imagined. But that night, something else happened. Charles Beauregard, drunk and emboldened by the evening's festivities, decided he was tired of waiting for his wedding night. He climbed the stairs with the confidence of a man who believed he owned Margaret already, and found Isaiah standing outside her door. "Move aside, boy." "Miss Margaret has retired for the evening, sir. She's not receiving visitors." Charles's face darkened. "I'm not a visitor. I'm her fiancé. Now move, or I'll have you whipped." Isaiah didn't move. He knew what would happen if Charles entered that room. He had heard enough conversations, seen enough bruises on other plantation women, to understand exactly how this night would end. "Sir, Master Whitmore gave me explicit orders. No one enters without Miss Margaret's permission." "You dare!" Charles lunged forward, trying to push past Isaiah. They struggled briefly, and Charles stumbled backward, falling heavily against the banister. At that moment, Margaret opened her door, drawn by the commotion. She took in the scene instantly, Charles drunk and aggressive, Isaiah standing protectively in his way. "Charles, go back downstairs." "Don't tell me what to do." Charles struggled to his feet. "You're going to be my wife. I have rights." "Not yet, you don't." Margaret's voice was ice. "And if you try to force your way in here, I'll scream loud enough to wake the whole house. Do you really want everyone to see you like this?" The threat of social embarrassment succeeded where resistance had failed. Charles straightened his jacket, his face ugly with humiliation and rage. "You'll pay for this," he said to Isaiah. "Both of you will pay." He staggered back down the stairs. Margaret and Isaiah stood frozen, both knowing that everything had just changed. Charles wouldn't let this insult stand. By morning, there would be consequences. They came at dawn. Whitmore himself appeared with Jonas Pritchard and 2 other overseers. Isaiah was dragged from his room before he could speak, his arms twisted behind his back. "You assaulted a white man," Whitmore said, his face carved from stone. "Charles tells me you put your hands on him, that you threatened him." "That's not—" "Silence!" Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. "Do you know what the punishment is for a slave who strikes a white man? They'll want to hang you. Hell, they'll want to burn you. But you've been useful, so I'll be merciful. 50 lashes, then you're sold south. I've got a buyer in Mississippi who doesn't ask questions." "Father, no!" Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Isaiah was protecting me. Charles was drunk. He was trying to force his way into my room." "Margaret, go back to your room." "I won't." She flew down the stairs, her composure completely shattered. "Isaiah did nothing wrong. He was following your orders. You can't punish him for that." Whitmore's eyes narrowed as he looked between his daughter and the slave being held by his men. Isaiah saw the moment realization dawned, the long hours they'd spent together, the way Margaret was defending him now, the desperation in her voice. "Margaret." Whitmore's voice was deadly quiet. "What have you done?" "Nothing. We've done nothing." But her voice shook, and they both knew the truth didn't matter. The appearance of impropriety was enough. Over the next 3 days, the house descended into chaos. Charles broke the engagement, spreading rumors that made Margaret's name poison among respectable families. Whitmore locked his daughter in her room while he decided what to do. Isaiah was thrown into a shed behind the stables, waiting for his punishment or his sale, whichever came first. But on the 4th night, Margaret did something no one expected. She picked the lock on her door, a skill taught to her by Isaiah during one of their midnight conversations, and went straight to her father's study. She found him there with his ledgers, calculating losses. "I'm pregnant." Whitmore's head snapped up. "What?" "I'm pregnant. It's Isaiah's child." The lie came easily, perhaps because part of her wished it were true. "So you can't sell him. If you do, everyone will know why. The whole county will know that your daughter carried a slave's child." The blood drained from Whitmore's face. "That's impossible. You've never been alone with him. I had him watched." "Not carefully enough." Margaret's voice was steady now, almost serene. She had nothing left to lose. "I chose this, Father, not him. I sought him out. I made it happen. So if you're going to punish anyone, punish me." "You're lying." But Whitmore's voice was uncertain now. "You're lying to protect him." "Am I? Are you willing to risk the truth getting out? Because I'll tell everyone. I'll stand in the town square and announce it if I have to. Your daughter, ruined by a slave you forced into her company. How will that look?" Whitmore stood, his hands shaking with rage. For a moment, Margaret thought he might strike her. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the fields he owned. the empire he'd built on the backs of the people he considered property. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why would you throw away everything, your name, your future, your very life, for a slave?" "Because he's the only person who's ever seen me as human," Margaret said quietly. "Because in this whole world of cruelty and chains, he showed me kindness. Because I'm tired of pretending that what we do here is civilized. It's not. It's monstrous, and I won't be part of it anymore." The silence stretched. Then Whitmore spoke, his voice empty of emotion. "Isaiah will be sold tomorrow, to a trader headed for the Deep South. You'll never see him again. As for you, you'll stay in this house. You'll never marry, never have children, never see society again. You'll live here as a ghost until you die. That is the price of your choice. And if I am pregnant, then the child will be sold the moment it's born." Whitmore turned to face her, and Margaret saw something she'd never seen before. Her father was crying. "You've destroyed us both, Margaret. You've destroyed everything." "No, Father. You destroyed it when you built it on slavery. I'm just the one telling the truth." Isaiah was sold the next morning to a trader named Hodges, a hard-faced man who dealt in what he called problem slaves. Isaiah asked no questions, made no protests. He had expected death. Instead, he got exiled to the brutal cotton plantations of the Mississippi Delta. It was a slower death, but death nonetheless. As he was loaded into the wagon with a dozen other slaves, he looked back at the house one last time. Margaret stood at her window, a white figure framed in glass. They were too far apart for him to see her expression, but he knew she was watching. They had never touched beyond that single, impossible kiss. They had never been together in the way Whitmore suspected, but they had committed a greater transgression. They had seen each other as fully human, and in the world of 1842 Georgia, that was the most forbidden thing of all. The wagon rolled away. Isaiah turned his face forward toward Mississippi and whatever horrors awaited him there. He had survived this long. He would survive longer. And perhaps, in some distant future, he could barely imagine, his survival would itself be a kind of resistance. Margaret wasn't pregnant. The lie had bought Isaiah's life, barely, but couldn't save him from being sold. As weeks turned to months, she lived as her father had decreed, a ghost in her own house. The servants whispered about her, and the few visitors who came treated her with barely concealed contempt. But something unexpected happened. 3 months after Isaiah's departure, Margaret discovered she was genuinely pregnant. In a final act of defiance against her father's watchful eyes, she had found a way to leave the house one night during the chaos of Isaiah's sale. She had gone to him in that shed, and they had shared one desperate, forbidden night, knowing it would be their only one. When she could no longer hide her condition, Whitmore nearly went mad with rage. But Margaret stood firm. "You already told everyone I was ruined," she said. "Now it's simply true." The child was born in the spring of 1843, a boy with Isaiah's dark eyes and Margaret's delicate features. Whitmore, true to his word, tried to have the infant sold immediately, but Margaret threatened to take her story to the newspapers, to the churches, to anyone who would listen. The scandal would destroy not just the family name, but Whitmore's entire business. So an arrangement was made. The child would be raised as a ward of the household, given the Whitmore name but never acknowledged as legitimate. He would live in the shadow of society, neither slave nor free, a living testament to his parents' transgression. Margaret named him Isaiah Joseph Whitmore. She knew his father would never see him, would probably never even know he existed, but she wanted the boy to carry something of the man who had shown her what courage looked like. The story spread anyway, as such stories always do. Whispered versions traveled from plantation to plantation, mutating with each telling. Some said Margaret had seduced Isaiah. Others said Isaiah had forced himself upon her. Very few told the truth, that two people trapped in different cages had found in each other a moment of genuine human connection and had paid the ultimate price for it. Isaiah never learned about his son. He died 4 years later in Mississippi, worked to death in the cotton fields, one of thousands of nameless slaves who disappeared into the machinery of the South's peculiar institution. He was 36 years old. Margaret lived until 1881, long enough to see the Civil War destroy the world she had been born into. Her son grew up strange and isolated, belonging nowhere, accepted by no one. When the war ended, he took the surname Freeman and headed north, trying to escape the shadow of his birth. The Whitmore plantation was burned by Union soldiers in 1864. The great house, the fields, the slave quarters, all of it turned to ash and memory. Henry Whitmore died of a stroke 6 months before the surrender, and his last words were reportedly about honor and betrayal, though no one could say which he meant. The true shock wasn't what happened between Isaiah and Margaret. It was what happened after. The way their brief connection sent ripples through an entire community, forcing people to see what they had tried so hard to ignore. The system they lived under wasn't just evil, it was unsustainable, built on a lie so fundamental that even one moment of authentic human connection between a slave and his master's daughter could shake its foundations. Isaiah Joseph Whitmore grew up to become a teacher in Philadelphia, educating the children of freed slaves. He never spoke publicly about his origins, but he kept one thing from his mother, a letter she had written to his father but never sent, describing the son Isaiah would never know. In it she wrote, "What we did was impossible, but I would choose it again, even knowing the cost, because for a few weeks I was fully alive, and so were you." The letter sits now in a historical society archive, a remnant of a story that isn't quite history and isn't quite romance, but rather a testament to the terrible price of human connection in an inhuman world. It reminds us that slavery didn't just destroy those who were enslaved. It destroyed everyone it touched, crushing love, hope, and humanity beneath the weight of its monstrous logic. In the end, Henry Whitmore's reward for his loyal slave became the instrument of his own downfall. He had tried to use Isaiah's service to demonstrate the rightness of his system, to prove that slaves could be elevated through good behavior. Instead, he had proven the opposite, that no system built on ownership of human beings could withstand the basic truth of human dignity and connection. The true shock wasn't what happened, it was what it revealed.